Before we begin tonight's terrifying true story, I want you to think about the last time you were alone in your house at night. That sense of safety you feel when you're surrounded by familiar walls, your own belongings, locks on the doors that you control. Tonight's story will change how you think about that safety forever. This comes from Sarah, a 17-year-old from Rochester, Minnesota, who discovered that sometimes the most dangerous threats don't break into your home. They're already living there, hiding in plain sight, watching everything you do. As I tell you Sarah's story, remember that this really happened, and it could happen in any suburban house, in any quiet neighborhood, where families feel perfectly safe behind locked doors. My name is Sarah, and I used to love having the house to myself. My parents traveled frequently for work, and by the time I was 17, they trusted me to stay alone for a week or two at a time. Our house in Rochester was everything you'd expect from a middle-class Minnesota suburb, 2 stories, colonial style, with a big attic and a basement that my dad had converted into a family room. It sat on a quiet street, lined with similar houses, where everyone knew their neighbors, and the biggest crime was kids toilet papering houses on Halloween. I felt completely safe there, safer than anywhere else in the world. It was my sanctuary, filled with my things, my memories, my private spaces, where I could be completely myself, without any pretense or performance. The week my parents left for a conference in Denver started exactly like all the others. Mum left detailed instructions about everything from taking out the garbage to watering her plants. Dad made sure all the doors and windows had working locks, and they both reminded me about the emergency numbers posted on the refrigerator. I hugged them goodbye on Monday morning and watched their rental car disappear down Maple Street, already planning my week of freedom. I'd stay up late watching movies, order pizza whenever I wanted, and enjoy the luxury of having every room in the house to myself. The first night was perfect. I made popcorn, binge-watched Netflix shows my parents would never approve of, and fell asleep on the living room couch without anyone telling me to go to bed properly. Tuesday night was when everything changed, though I didn't realize it at first. I was in my bedroom around 2 a.m., scrolling through social media before bed, when I heard footsteps. In the attic directly above my room, slow, deliberate footsteps, like someone was walking carefully across the wooden floor up there. My first thought was that it must be mice or squirrels that had gotten into the attic somehow, but these sounds were too heavy, too rhythmic to be small animals. They sounded exactly like human footsteps, and they were moving from one end of the attic to the other in a pattern that seemed almost methodical. I lay in bed listening for almost 20 minutes as the footsteps continued their slow circuit above my head. Sometimes they would stop for several minutes, then resume, always following the same path from the area above my parents' bedroom to the space above the hall bathroom. I tried to convince myself it was the house settling, or maybe pipes expanding and contracting, but I'd lived in this house for 8 years and had never heard anything like this before. When the sounds finally stopped around 2:30 a.m., I was too unsettled to sleep immediately, but eventually exhaustion won out, and I drifted off. The next morning I almost convinced myself I'd imagined the whole thing, in the bright Minnesota sunshine, with birds chirping outside and normal suburban life continuing all around me. The idea of mysterious footsteps seemed ridiculous. I had breakfast, did some homework, and spent most of the day pushing the previous night out of my mind. But that afternoon, when I went to make a sandwich for lunch, something made me stop and stare at the refrigerator. The food inside had been rearranged. It was subtle, the kind of thing you might not notice if you weren't paying attention, but I knew my own kitchen better than anywhere else in the world. The milk jug, which I always kept on the right side of the top shelf, was now on the left. The leftover pizza from Monday night had been moved from the middle shelf to the bottom. Most unsettling of all, there was a coffee mug in the sink that I definitely hadn't used. It was one of my dad's favorite mugs, with a logo from his old college, and it had coffee residue in the bottom along with a lingering smell that suggested it had been used recently. I stood in the kitchen for several minutes, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Had I rearranged things and somehow forgotten? Was it possible I'd used my dad's mug without remembering? The alternative explanation was too disturbing to consider seriously, but a cold feeling was starting to form in my stomach. Someone had been in our house, in our kitchen, using our things, but all the doors and windows were still locked, exactly as my parents had left them, and there was no sign of forced entry anywhere. That night, I made sure to lock my bedroom door before going to sleep, something I'd never done before when I was alone in the house. But at exactly 2:15 a.m., the footsteps started again. This time they sounded different, more confident, like whoever was up there felt comfortable moving around our attic. I heard what sounded like boxes being moved, items being shuffled around, and at one point I could have sworn I heard the soft sound of someone speaking, though I couldn't make out any words. I grabbed my phone and called my best friend Emma, whispering frantically into the phone about the sounds above my head. She tried to be reassuring, suggesting it might be raccoons or that old houses make weird noises, but even she sounded uncertain when I described the methodical nature of the footsteps. She offered to come over and stay with me, but it was a school night and her parents would never allow it. After we hung up, I lay awake until nearly 4 a.m., listening to the intermittent sounds from above, too scared to investigate, but too curious to ignore them completely. Thursday morning brought another disturbing discovery. When I went downstairs for breakfast, I found evidence that someone had been in our living room during the night. The remote control was sitting on the coffee table instead of its usual spot on the side table, and when I checked the TV's history, it showed that someone had been watching late-night programming between 3 a.m. and 5 a.m., shows I'd never heard of, channels my family never watched. The volume had been set very low, probably so the sound wouldn't travel upstairs to where I was sleeping. The realization hit me like a physical blow. Someone was living in our house, not breaking in during the day and leaving, but actually staying here, hiding somewhere during the day and coming out at night to use our kitchen, watch our TV, move around like they owned the place. The thought made me nauseated, but I forced myself to think logically about what this meant. Where could someone hide during the day in a house I knew so well, and how long had this been going on? I called my parents, but they were in meetings all day, and I could only leave voicemails asking them to call me back. I considered calling the police, but what would I tell them? That food had been moved around, and someone had watched TV, that I heard footsteps that could have been anything. I needed proof, something concrete that would make adults take me seriously instead of dismissing me as a paranoid teenager with an overactive imagination. That's when I decided to set up my laptop as a hidden camera. I positioned it on the kitchen counter, angled so it would capture the living room and part of the kitchen, and set it to record continuously overnight. If someone was really coming downstairs while I slept, I would have video evidence. I made sure the laptop was plugged in so the battery wouldn't die, and I even put a piece of tape over the power light so it wouldn't glow and give away that it was recording. Then I went to bed early, claiming I had a headache, but really just wanting to be safely in my locked room before whatever happened at night began to happen. I barely slept, checking my phone constantly and listening for any sounds from downstairs. Around 2:30 a.m., I heard the familiar footsteps above my head, but this time they seemed to be moving toward the area above the stairs. My heart pounded as I realized that whoever was up there was about to come down, probably assuming I was asleep and wouldn't hear them moving around the house. I pulled my covers over my head and tried to breathe as quietly as possible, terrified that they might hear me awake and decide to investigate. The footsteps on the attic floor stopped, replaced by different sounds. The creak of the pull-down attic ladder being lowered, soft thuds as someone climbed down into the hallway, then silence for several long minutes, followed by the gentle sounds of someone moving around downstairs. Cabinet doors opening and closing softly, the refrigerator door, the whisper of sock-covered feet on hardwood floors. It continued for over 2 hours, sometimes punctuated by the low murmur of the television or the soft clink of dishes being used. When I finally heard the attic ladder being raised again and the footsteps retreating back across the ceiling, I was shaking so badly I could barely hold my phone. I waited another hour to make sure they were settled back in their hiding place, then crept downstairs as quietly as I could manage to retrieve my laptop. My hands were trembling so violently I could barely work the trackpad, but when I opened the video file and started playing it back, I saw something that made my blood turn to ice. At 2:47 a.m., a man emerged from the hallway and walked casually into our kitchen like he lived there. He was middle-aged, maybe in his 40s, with thinning hair and wearing clothes that looked like they'd been slept in for days. But what terrified me most was how comfortable he seemed, how familiar he was with our house layout. He went straight to the refrigerator without hesitation, made himself a sandwich using our food, and then settled into my dad's favorite chair to watch TV while he ate. He knew exactly which remote controlled which device, adjusted the volume to a level that wouldn't travel upstairs, and even used a coaster for his drink. The video showed him moving around our house for nearly 3 hours, using our bathroom, washing his dishes in our sink, and going through our mail like he had every right to be there. At one point he walked over to a family photo on the mantel and stared at it for several long minutes, his finger tracing my face in the picture. The casual intimacy of that gesture made me feel sick to my stomach. This wasn't a random break-in or a crime of opportunity. This person had been watching us, studying us, learning our routines and our habits, and based on how comfortable he seemed, he'd been doing it for a very long time. When he finally disappeared back into the hallway, heading toward the attic ladder, I saw him pause at the bottom of the stairs and look up toward where my bedroom was. He stood there for almost 5 minutes, just staring upward, and I realized with horror that he was listening to make sure I was still asleep. If I had gotten up to use the bathroom or get a drink of water, I would have walked right into him. I didn't go back to sleep that night. Instead, I sat in my locked bedroom with a chair braced against the door, clutching my phone and trying to figure out what to do. Calling my parents seemed pointless since they were 1,000 miles away and couldn't help immediately. The police felt like the obvious choice, but I was terrified of what this man might do if he realized I knew about him. What if he decided that keeping me quiet was more important than maintaining his secret life in our attic? As the sun came up Friday morning, I made a decision that probably saved my life. Instead of confronting the situation directly, I would gather more evidence and then get help. I needed to know exactly where in the attic he was hiding and how long this had been going on. But first, I needed to get out of the house for a few hours to clear my head and figure out my next move. I drove to the Rochester Public Library and used their computers to research similar cases online. What I found made me realize how much danger I'd been in without knowing it. There were dozens of documented cases of people secretly living in other people's homes, hiding in attics, basements, crawl spaces, even large closets. Most of the victims never realized they were sharing their homes with uninvited guests until something went wrong, until the hidden person became violent or careless or decided they wanted more than just a secret place to sleep. The more I read, the more I understood that this man's behavior was escalating. He'd started by simply using our house at night, then begun going through our personal belongings, and recently, he'd been watching me sleep. The logical next step in this progression was direct contact, and I couldn't let that happen. I needed professional help, and I needed it immediately. I called the police from the library parking lot, and when I explained that I had video evidence of someone living secretly in our house, they took me very seriously. 2 officers met me at the house within 30 minutes, and I showed them the laptop footage while we sat in their patrol car. Their expressions grew more concerned as they watched the man move confidently through our home, and when they saw him staring at my photo and looking up toward my bedroom, one of them muttered a curse under his breath. "This guy's been casing your family for a long time," Officer Rodriguez told me grimly. "The way he moves around, knows where everything is, that's not someone who just found a way into your house. He's been watching you folks, probably for months. We need to get you somewhere safe while we search the attic and figure out exactly what we're dealing with." They called for backup before entering the house, and I waited in the patrol car while 4 officers carefully searched every room, closet, and storage area. It took them almost an hour to find his hiding place, tucked away in a corner of the attic behind some old Christmas decorations and boxes of winter clothes. What they discovered there was something I still have nightmares about, even years later. He'd created a complete living space using items stolen from throughout our house, blankets and pillows from our linen closet, food stored in containers from our kitchen, and books from our shelves arranged as if this corner of our attic was his personal bedroom. But the most disturbing part was the collection of photographs covering one wall, pictures of our family that he'd taken secretly over what must have been months of surveillance, photos of my parents leaving for work, pictures of me coming home from school, images taken through our windows showing us eating dinner or watching TV. In the center of this gallery of stolen moments was a series of photos that made my skin crawl. Pictures of me sleeping in my bedroom, taken from different angles and different nights. Some looked like they'd been shot from inside my room, which meant he'd been coming downstairs and entering my private space while I was unconscious and vulnerable. The officers found a small collection of my personal items hidden in a shoebox, jewelry I thought I'd lost, clothes that had gone missing from the laundry, even my old diary from middle school. The man was arrested later that day when he returned to what he thought was his secret hideaway. His name was David Chen, and he was a registered sex offender who'd been living off the grid since violating his parole 6 months earlier. According to the police, He'd chosen our house because my parents' travel schedule made it easy for him to establish a routine without being detected. He'd been breaking in during the day when no one was home, studying our habits and our belongings, then staying overnight in the attic when the house was supposed to be empty. The most chilling part of the investigation was when they asked him how long he'd been living in our house. His answer was 4 months. 4 months of him watching our family, learning our routines, taking our things, and sleeping just 15 feet above my bedroom. 4 months of family dinners and movie nights and normal suburban life, all while a predator observed us from above, like we were animals in a zoo. Officer Rodriguez later told me that if I hadn't set up that camera and called for help when I did, the situation would likely have escalated to direct contact within days. Chen had been taking increasingly personal items and spending longer periods watching me sleep, classic signs that he was building up to some kind of confrontation. The photos in his collection showed a progression over months, starting with distant surveillance shots and gradually becoming more intimate and invasive. My parents flew home immediately when the police called them, and we stayed in a hotel for a week, while crime scene investigators processed our house and security experts checked for other vulnerabilities. The hardest part wasn't the invasion of privacy or even the fear. It was the realization that our home, the place where I'd felt safest in the world, had been compromised for months without any of us knowing. Every memory from the past 4 months was now tainted with the knowledge that we hadn't been alone, that everything we'd done had been observed and documented by someone who had no right to be there. We moved to a different house in a different neighborhood, and my parents installed a comprehensive security system with cameras and motion detectors in every room. But even now, years later, I can't sleep comfortably in any house without checking every closet, every storage area, every place someone might hide. I listen for footsteps above my head, and I notice when things are moved even slightly from where I left them. The sense of security that most people take for granted in their own homes was stolen from me, along with my jewelry and my diary. The thing that haunts me most isn't what happened, but what was supposed to happen. Chen never explained what his ultimate plan was, why he was escalating from observation to collection of personal items to photographing me while I slept. Was he building up the courage to make direct contact? Was he planning to hurt me when my parents were out of town and no one would find me for days? I'll never know, and in some ways, that's worse than knowing would have been. If you ever hear unexplained sounds in your house or notice that things have been moved or items are missing, please don't dismiss it as forgetfulness or imagination. Trust your instincts when something feels wrong in your own home, because sometimes the most dangerous threats don't break down your door. They've been living with you all along, hiding in plain sight, waiting for the perfect moment to reveal themselves. Your home should be your sanctuary, the one place where you can let your guard down completely. Don't let anyone steal that from you the way David Chen stole it from me. Check your attics, your basements, your crawl spaces. Make sure you know every corner of your own house, because if you don't, someone else might be calling it home too. And if you're ever alone in your house at night and you hear footsteps where footsteps shouldn't be, don't investigate alone. Call for help immediately, because the person making those sounds has already been watching you longer than you know, and they're not going to stop unless someone makes them stop.